The stone floor was cold. Poppy Hendricks had spent 19 years learning to be invisible. In the castle kitchens, invisibility meant survival. It meant you stayed quiet, kept your head down, and prayed no one noticed you. But invisibility shattered when her body betrayed her. The heat came 3 days early. Violent, sudden, uncontrollable. And Gerald Cantrell, the head steward who controlled every servant's fate, noticed. What followed was pain, corridors of stone, being dragged through halls she'd only ever cleaned on her knees. She didn't plan to crawl into the Great War Chamber. Didn't consciously choose the one room where the most powerful men in the kingdom planned wars and executions. But pain erases plans. So she pushed through agony and collapsed at the feet of 4 battle-hardened commanders, and at the feet of Alpha King Jimmy Mackenzie himself. As her vision blurred and her body trembled, she whispered words that would change everything. "It hurts. I can't close my legs." The silence was absolute. Then the Alpha King did something no ruler had done in 1,000 years of tradition. He knelt, and when he lifted her broken body into his arms, Poppy had no idea she'd just asked the most dangerous man in the realm for protection. She had no idea his wolf had recognized something he'd spent his entire life denying. She had no idea the king who never showed mercy was about to shatter every rule for a girl who thought she was nothing. Poppy Hendricks felt it pressing against her palms, rough and unforgiving, as she dragged herself forward. Each movement sent pain radiating through her body in waves that made her vision blur. Her thighs trembled. Her knees shook so violently she couldn't control them. She couldn't close her legs. The Great War Chamber stretched before her like an endless cavern. Torchlight flickered against stone walls covered in maps of the kingdom. Daggers pinned parchment in place, marking territories and battle strategies. The smell of burning wax mixed with leather and steel filled the air. 4 commanders stood around a massive oak table in the center of the room. Jeremy Doolin, broad-shouldered and scarred, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. Bruce Chandler, lean and calculating, his dark eyes studying the maps with cold precision. Josiah Hampton, younger than the others but no less deadly, his jaw tight with concentration. Simone Cantrell, the only woman among them, her sharp features set in an expression of controlled fury. And at the head of the table stood Alpha King Jimmy Mackenzie. He was taller than the others, his presence filling the chamber even when he stood perfectly still. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes, those eyes that had sentenced men to death and brought kingdoms to their knees, were focused on the strategy before him, until Poppy collapsed. Her body gave out 3 steps into the chamber. The small sound she made as her knees hit the floor echoed through the vast space like a gunshot. Every head turned. Poppy tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Pain radiated from between her legs, sharp and relentless, spreading through her lower body until she couldn't tell where one hurt ended and another began. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, it hurts." The commanders stared. Not with compassion, not with concern, but with the kind of shock that comes from seeing something that should never exist in their world. An Omega servant, in the war chamber, bleeding and broken and begging. Poppy's vision swam. She could feel her body trembling, could feel the heat that had betrayed her still pulsing beneath her skin despite the agony. Her servant's dress was torn at the hem, dirty from being dragged through corridors. Her bare feet were scraped raw. "I can't," her voice broke. Tears streamed down her face, hot against her cold cheeks. "I can't close my legs." Silence fell like a shroud. King Jimmy moved, not toward the door to call guards, not back toward the safety of his commanders. He moved toward her. Poppy's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd never been this close to the king. Servants didn't get close to the king. Servants barely got to see the king, and when they did, it was from a distance, heads bowed, eyes lowered. But now he was walking toward her, his boots heavy against the stone floor, and she couldn't look away. He was beautiful in the way a storm was, beautiful, dangerous, and untamed, and absolutely terrifying. "Your Majesty," Bruce Chandler's voice cut through the silence. "Shall I remove her?" Jimmy didn't answer. He kept walking until he stood directly in front of Poppy. She could see the fine embroidery on his boots now, could smell the scent of him leather and pine, and something darker, something that made her Omega instincts scream both in fear and recognition. Alpha. Strong alpha. Dominant alpha. The kind of alpha who could tear apart anyone who challenged him without breaking a sweat. Poppy tried to make herself smaller, tried to curl in on herself, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The pain was too much. Look at me. The king's voice was low, controlled, but it carried absolute authority. Slowly, painfully, Poppy lifted her eyes. Jimmy Mackenzie knelt. The chamber erupted in barely suppressed gasps. An Alpha King didn't kneel. Not for anyone. Not for visiting royalty. Not for treaties. Not for ceremonies. An Alpha King stood above all others, always. It was tradition. It was law. It was the foundation of everything their society was built upon. But Jimmy Mackenzie was on one knee in front of a sobbing Omega servant girl, and his expression was unlike anything Poppy had ever seen. Who did this to you? His voice was still controlled, but there was something beneath it now. Something that sounded like fury held on a very short leash. Poppy's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jimmy's jaw tightened. Can you stand? She shook her head. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. It hurts too much. I can't move. Something shifted in the king's expression. His eyes moved from her face down, to her trembling legs, to the blood staining her torn dress, to her scraped feet. Simone, he said, his voice sharp now. Get Lydia Lambert. Now. Simone Cantrell didn't hesitate. She turned and ran from the chamber, her boots echoing down the corridor. Your Majesty. Josiah Hampton stepped forward carefully. You should return to your strategy, Jimmy interrupted, and say nothing of what you've seen here until I give you permission. It wasn't a suggestion. Jeremy Doolin bowed slightly. Yes, Your Majesty. The 3 remaining commanders retreated to the far side of the chamber, their faces carefully blank but their eyes sharp with questions. Jimmy turned his attention back to Poppy. I'm going to lift you. It's going to hurt. Please don't, Poppy whispered. Please, I'll leave. I'll go back to the kitchens. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come here. You should never have had to come here like this. Jimmy's hand moved slowly, telegraphing his intentions before he touched her. But you did, and now I'm going to help you. His hand settled on her shoulder, warm and steady. Poppy flinched at the contact, not from fear but from the shock of it. An Alpha King was touching her. An Alpha King was speaking to her like she mattered. On 3, Jimmy said quietly. 1, Poppy braced herself. 2, she closed her eyes. 3, Jimmy lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all. One arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back, and suddenly she was against his chest, cradled like something precious instead of something broken. The pain was immediate and sharp, but Jimmy held her steady, his movements careful as he stood. Breathe, he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. Just breathe. Poppy tried. Short, shallow breaths that didn't ease the pain but at least kept her conscious. Jimmy carried her out of the war chamber without another word to his commanders. His stride was steady and sure, navigating corridors she'd only ever cleaned, moving through parts of the castle she'd only ever imagined. Servants pressed themselves against walls as they passed, their eyes wide with shock. An Alpha King carrying an Omega servant in his arms. It was impossible. It was scandalous. It was happening. Poppy's head rested against Jimmy's shoulder because she didn't have the strength to hold it up. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, could feel the controlled power in every step he took. Where are you taking me? She whispered. My chambers. Poppy's eyes flew open. I can't, Your Majesty, I'm not. You're injured, Jimmy said simply. And Lydia will need proper light and space to examine you. My chambers are closest. They climbed a spiral staircase, and Poppy bit back a whimper with each step. Jimmy's arms tightened around her slightly, protective, and she found herself pressing closer to him despite every instinct that said she should maintain distance. He was warm, so warm, and his scent was starting to cut through the haze of pain, bringing with it a strange sense of safety that made no logical sense. Alpha scents were supposed to make Omegas afraid during heat. They were supposed to trigger submission, or panic, or desperate need, but Jimmy's scent made her feel protected. The king's private chambers were nothing like Poppy had imagined. She'd expected gold and silk and extravagance. Instead, she found stone walls softened by tapestries, a large bed with simple dark furs, and windows that overlooked the kingdom below. Jimmy carried her to the bed and set her down with such careful gentleness that Poppy's breath caught. "Lie back," he instructed. She did, wincing as the movement pulled at her injuries. Jimmy stepped back but didn't leave. He stood at the foot of the bed, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. "What's your name?" "Poppy," she whispered. "Poppy Hendricks. How old are you, Poppy?" 19, Your Majesty. "And you work in the kitchens?" She nodded. "How long?" 3 years. Jimmy's jaw clenched. 3 years. "And in those 3 years, has anyone helped you?" Poppy didn't understand the question. "Your Majesty?" "Suppressants," he said bluntly. "Heat suppressants. Has anyone provided them?" Shame burned through her. I was saving. They're expensive. I almost had enough, but then..." She trailed off, unable to finish. "But then your heat came early." It wasn't a question, but Poppy nodded anyway. Jimmy turned away, his shoulders tight with tension. He walked to the window and stood there, silhouetted against the late afternoon light. The door burst open. Lydia Lambert swept in, a healer's bag in one hand and Simone Cantrell behind her. Lydia was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, with silver streaking through her dark hair. She took one look at Poppy on the king's bed, and her expression went carefully neutral. "Out," she said to Jimmy without preamble. "Both of you. I need to examine her." "I want to know everything," Jimmy said, his voice low and dangerous. "Every injury. You'll know everything," Lydia interrupted. "After I've done my job. Now out." For a moment, Poppy thought the king might refuse. But then he nodded once, sharp and controlled, and strode from the room with Simone following. The door closed behind them. Lydia set her bag on the bed and looked at Poppy with kind but serious eyes. "I'm going to touch you now. I'll be as gentle as I can, but this is going to hurt. Can you be brave for me?" Poppy nodded, tears already forming. "Good girl," Lydia murmured, and began her examination. Outside the chamber, Jimmy stood with his back against the stone wall, hands clenched into fists. Simone waited beside him, silent. "How did she get to the war chamber?" Jimmy asked finally. "I don't know yet," Simone admitted. "But I'll find out. Someone hurt her." Jimmy's voice was flat, emotionless, which was somehow more terrifying than if he'd shouted. "Someone hurt her badly enough that she crawled to the one room in this entire castle where she knew she'd find me. Your Majesty." She couldn't close her legs, Simone. Jimmy turned to look at his commander and his eyes burned with barely controlled rage. She was sobbing in pain and she couldn't close her legs. "What does that tell you?" Simone's expression hardened. "It tells me someone's going to die." "Not yet." Jimmy pushed off the wall. "First, I want to know who. And I want to know why. And then..." He trailed off, but the promise of violence hung in the air between them. The door opened. Lydia stepped out, her face grim. "Well?" Jimmy demanded. Lydia closed the door carefully behind her. When she spoke, her voice was low and controlled. "She has bruising on her inner thighs. Fresh. She's been bleeding. There's tearing." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "This wasn't just rough handling, Your Majesty. This was brutal." Jimmy's hands clenched so tight his knuckles went white. "There's more," Lydia continued. "She has older bruises. On her ribs, her back, her arms. Some are weeks old, some are months old. This girl has been hurt repeatedly, and no one did anything about it. Can you help her?" Jimmy's voice was barely above a whisper. "I've given her something for the pain. I've cleaned and treated the wounds. But Your Majesty..." Lydia met his eyes directly. "The physical injuries will heal. The other damage? That's going to take much longer." Jimmy nodded slowly. "Thank you, Lydia. Can I see her?" "She's resting. But yes." Lydia hesitated. "Your Majesty, I have to ask, what are you planning to do?" "I'm planning to find out who did this," Jimmy said quietly. "And then I'm planning to make sure it never happens again, to anyone." He walked past Lydia into the chamber. Poppy lay on his bed, covered with dark furs despite the warmth of the room. Her face was turned toward the window, and tears tracked silently down her cheeks. Jimmy approached slowly, making his footsteps loud enough that she'd hear him coming. She turned her head. "Your Majesty." "Just Jimmy," he said, pulling a chair close to the bed. "When we're alone, you can call me Jimmy." Poppy's eyes widened. "That's not. I couldn't." "You can." Jimmy sat down, careful to keep distance between them. "Poppy, I need you to tell me what happened. I need you to tell me who hurt you." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I can't." "Why?" "Because he'll kill me." Her voice broke. "If I tell you, he'll make sure I disappear, and no one will ever know what happened to me." Jimmy leaned forward slightly. "I give you my word as king, as alpha, as a man that no one will touch you again. Not while I'm breathing. Tell me his name." Poppy stared at him, searching his face for something. Truth, maybe. Or sincerity. Or just the slightest hint that he actually meant what he said. She must have found it, because she whispered. "Gerald Cantrell." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "The head steward," Jimmy said slowly. Poppy nodded. "He manages all the servants. He controls everything in the lower levels. The kitchens, the laundry, the stables. If you cross him..." She swallowed hard. "People disappear. Tell me what he did." So she did. She told him about the heat that came 3 days early, about trying to hide it, trying to work through it, trying to stay invisible the way she'd always stayed invisible. She told him about Gerald noticing, about being dragged from the kitchens by her hair, about the corridors and the stone floor and the pain. She told him about the other girls, Briella and Clara and Kimora and Pearl, about how they'd all learned to stay quiet, to stay small, to never complain. And she told him about crawling to the war chamber because it was the only place she could think of where someone might actually help her. By the time she finished, Jimmy's expression was carved from stone. "How many?" he asked quietly. "How many girls has he hurt?" "I don't know." Poppy's voice was barely audible. "More than just us. Some leave. Some just stop coming to work." Jimmy stood abruptly. "Rest now. I'll have guards posted outside this chamber. No one gets in without my permission. Do you understand?" Poppy nodded, exhausted. "Sleep," Jimmy said softly. "You're safe now." He walked to the door, but paused with his hand on the handle. Without turning around, he said, "Thank you for trusting me, Poppy. I won't let you down." Then he was gone. Poppy lay in the king's bed, surrounded by his scent, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. 3 days passed. Poppy spent them in the king's chambers, healing slowly under Lydia's careful attention. The pain lessened with each passing hour, fading from sharp agony to dull aches that she could almost ignore. But the fear remained. Every footstep in the corridor made her tense. Every voice beyond the door made her heart race. Even with guards posted outside, loyal men who answered directly to the king, Poppy couldn't shake the feeling that Gerald would find a way to reach her. Jimmy visited every evening. He never stayed long, just long enough to ask how she was feeling, to make sure she had everything she needed, to sit in the chair beside the bed and read from whatever book he'd brought with him that day. His voice was different when he read, softer, less controlled. There was warmth in it that Poppy had never heard directed at her before. On the 4th evening, she finally asked, "Why are you doing this?" Jimmy looked up from the book in his hands, a collection of poetry she didn't recognize. "Doing what?" "This." Poppy gestured vaguely at the room, at him, at everything. "Taking care of me, reading to me. You're the king. You have a kingdom to run. Why are you sitting here with a servant girl?" Jimmy closed the book slowly. "Because you deserve it. I'm nobody." "You're Poppy Hendricks," he said firmly. "You're 19 years old. You survived 3 years in a system designed to break you. You crawled through pain to find help instead of accepting what was done to you. That's not nobody, Poppy. That's someone worth protecting." She didn't know what to say to that. Jimmy stood, setting the book on the small table beside the bed. "I have news. The investigation is complete." Poppy's stomach tightened. And Gerald Cantrell wasn't working alone. Jimmy's expression darkened. He had help. Financial help from people who should have known better. Who? Nobles, Jimmy said quietly. Wealthy men who paid Gerald to provide them with access to certain servants. In exchange, Gerald received gold and protection. Poppy felt bile rise in her throat. How many nobles? 3 that we can prove. Wesley O'Connell, Gregory Hampton, and... Jimmy paused. Bruce Chandler. Your commander? Former commander, Jimmy corrected. He's been arrested. They all have. Poppy stared at him. You arrested nobles? But they could. They could start a rebellion, Jimmy finished. They could withdraw their support. They could make my life very difficult. I know. But I don't care. He moved closer to the bed, close enough that Poppy could see the exhaustion in his eyes. I found ledgers, he continued. Detailed records of payments, dates, names. Gerald kept everything. Probably as insurance, in case he ever needed leverage. It's going to make the trial very straightforward. Trial? Poppy's voice came out small. Public trial, Jimmy confirmed. In the throne room. I want every noble, every servant, every person in this castle to see what was happening. I want them to know that this ends now. They'll hate you for it. Probably. Jimmy's smile was grim. But they'll respect the law. And if they don't? His eyes hardened. Then they can join Gerald in exile. Poppy's breath caught. Exile? Not execution? That depends on you. She blinked. On me? Jimmy knelt beside the bed, bringing himself to her eye level. You're the victim here, Poppy. You and Briella and Clara and Kimora and Pearl. This is your justice, not mine. If you want Gerald dead, I'll make it happen. If you want him exiled, stripped of everything he owns, forced to live the rest of his life knowing he's nothing, that's your choice too. What about the nobles? Same choice. Jimmy's hand moved to rest on the bed beside hers, close but not touching. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. But I need you to think carefully, because whatever happens in that throne room is going to change this kingdom forever. Poppy looked at his hand, so close to hers, strong, scarred from weapons training, capable of terrible violence, but gentle. He'd been nothing but gentle with her. I need to talk to the others, she said finally. Briella, Clara, Kimora, Pearl. Before I decide anything, I need to know what they want. Jimmy nodded. I'll arrange it. They're all safe, by the way. Under guard like you. No one's touched them. Thank you. Poppy hesitated, then slowly moved her hand until her fingers brushed against his. For everything, Jimmy's breath caught. His eyes dropped to where their hands were almost touching, and something flickered across his face. Something hungry and restrained and achingly careful. Poppy, he said quietly, I need you to understand something. What? This isn't charity. His voice was low, almost rough. What I feel when I'm near you, what I want. He trailed off, seeming to struggle with the words. Poppy's heart hammered. What do you want? Jimmy's eyes met hers, and the intensity in them made her breath stop. Everything, he whispered. I want to protect you and heal you and make sure you never hurt again. But I also want to know what makes you smile. I want to hear you laugh. I want to fall asleep listening to you breathe and wake up with you in my arms. I want you, Poppy. Not because you're Omega or because I'm Alpha or because of any biological imperative. I want you because you're brave and strong and you survived when you should have been broken. Poppy couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at this powerful man kneeling beside her, confessing things that should never be said by a king to a servant. But, Jimmy continued, his voice firming slightly, I won't act on any of that until you're healed, until you're safe, until you have choices and freedom, and the ability to say no without fear. Do you understand? Slowly, Poppy nodded. Good, Jimmy stood, and the moment shattered like glass. I'll bring the others tomorrow. Get some rest. He was halfway to the door when Poppy found her voice. Jimmy? He stopped, his back still to her. I want you too. She saw his shoulders tense, saw his hand clench on the door handle. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. Then we'll see where this leads. When you're ready, he left without looking back. Poppy lay in the darkness, her hand still tingling where his fingers had brushed hers, and wondered how everything had changed so completely in just 4 days. The next morning, Lydia arrived with 4 young women. Poppy recognized them immediately. Briella Doolin, with her copper hair and green eyes. Clara Chandler, petite and dark-haired with shadows under her eyes. Kimora Haskins, tall and elegant, despite the bruises on her arms. Pearl Mackenzie, blonde and fragile-looking, but with steel in her gaze. They stared at Poppy in the king's bed with expressions of shock and disbelief. "It's true, then," Briella breathed. "The king, really. He's protecting her," Lydia said firmly. "All of you, actually. You're all under royal protection now." Clara moved closer to the bed. "Are you all right, Poppy?" "I'm healing." Poppy sat up slowly, wincing. "Thanks to Lydia." "And the king," Pearl added quietly. "They're saying he carried you himself, that he arrested nobles for what Gerald did." "It's true," Poppy confirmed. "All of it." Kimora's eyes were sharp. "Why? Why would he do that for servants?" "Because it was the right thing to do," Lydia answered before Poppy could. "And because your king is not like other alphas. Now, I'll give you privacy. You have much to discuss." She left, closing the door softly behind her. The 5 young women looked at each other in silence. "They want us to testify," Briella said finally. "At the trial, they want us to stand in front of everyone and tell them what Gerald did." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. I can't stand up there and—" "You don't have to," Poppy interrupted. "None of us do. The ledgers are evidence enough." "But our testimony would be stronger," Kimora said softly. "It would make it real for people. Not just numbers in a book, but actual harm to actual people." Pearl moved to sit on the edge of the bed. "I want to do it. I want to look Gerald in the face and tell everyone what he is." "You're braver than me," Clara whispered. "No," Pearl shook her head. "I'm just angrier. There's a difference." They talked for hours. About Gerald. About the nobles. About the years of silence and fear and pain that had become normal, and they talked about what they wanted. Not revenge, Poppy realized. None of them wanted blood. They wanted something better. They wanted safety. They wanted recognition. They wanted the world to know that what happened to them mattered. By the time the sun began to set, they'd made their decision. All 5 of them would testify. And they would ask not for execution, but for something more permanent. Something that would change the system that had allowed Gerald to thrive. They would ask for restitution, for land rights, for legal protections written into kingdom law. They would ask for a future where no Omega servant would ever have to suffer in silence again. When Jimmy returned that evening, Poppy told him their decision. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. "You're sure?" he asked when she finished. "We're sure." Jimmy nodded slowly. "Then I'll make it happen. The trial is set for 3 days from now. Are you strong enough to attend?" "I'll be there," Poppy promised. "We all will." "Good." Jimmy moved to his usual chair, but this time, instead of picking up a book, he just sat there, looking at her. "What?" Poppy asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm trying to memorize this," he admitted. "You, right now, because everything's about to change, and I want to remember this moment before it does." "Why?" "Because right now, you're safe. You're healing. You're making choices. And He trailed off, then smiled slightly. "I'm falling for you, Poppy Hendricks. Harder than I've ever fallen for anyone. And once that trial happens, once the kingdom sees what I'm willing to do for you and the others, there's no going back. So I'm memorizing this moment, this quiet, this peace." Poppy's chest tightened. "I'm scared." "I know." "What if it goes wrong? What if the nobles rebel? What if—" "Then we'll handle it." Jimmy's voice was firm. "Together. You're not alone anymore, Poppy. You're never going to be alone again." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand covered hers, warm and steady and solid. 3 days, he said quietly. "And then we change everything." Poppy nodded, her fingers curling around his. 3 days. And then justice. The throne room of Castle Mackenzie was designed to intimidate. Massive stone columns supported a vaulted ceiling 3 stories high. Banners bearing the royal crest, a silver wolf on a black field hung from the walls. Windows of colored glass cast rainbow patterns across the marble floor. And at the far end of the hall, elevated on a dais of black granite, sat the throne itself. Carved from a single piece of obsidian, inlaid with silver, it had witnessed the coronation of 23 kings. Today, it would witness something no king had ever done. Poppy stood with the other girls in an alcove off the main hall, hidden from view but able to see everything through a carved screen. Her hands shook. Despite the healing, despite Lydia's medicines, despite everything, she was terrified. Briella stood beside her, equally pale. There are so many people. She was right. The throne room was packed. Nobles in silk and velvet, servants in simple wool, guards lining the walls. Merchants and craftsmen allowed entry for this special occasion. Everyone wanted to see what the Alpha King would do. At the front of the crowd, separated by guards, stood 3 men in chains. Wesley O'Connell, round-faced and sweating despite the cool air. Gregory Hampton, tall and thin with a permanent sneer. And Bruce Chandler, who had been a commander just a week ago and now stood in disgrace. But it was the 4th prisoner who drew Poppy's attention, Gerald Cantrell. He stood alone, unchained but surrounded by guards. His head was held high, his expression arrogant. He looked like a man who believed he would walk free. The doors at the back of the hall opened. King Jimmy Mackenzie entered. He wore full ceremonial armor, black steel chased with silver, a cloak of wolf fur across his shoulders. The crown on his head was simple, just a silver circlet, but on him it looked like a weapon. He walked the length of the throne room in absolute silence. Every eye followed him. Every breath was held. He climbed the dais and turned to face his people. "We are gathered," Jimmy said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "to witness justice." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. 3 days ago," Jimmy continued, "an Omega servant girl collapsed in my war chamber. She was injured, bleeding, in so much pain she could barely speak. Her name is Poppy Hendricks, and what was done to her is the reason we're here today." More murmurs, louder now. Head Steward Gerald Cantrell stepped forward. Gerald moved with confidence, stopping at the base of the dais. "Your Majesty, you stand accused of systematic abuse of Omega servants under your supervision. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Majesty." Gerald's voice was smooth. "I have served this castle faithfully for 15 years. These accusations are nothing more than ledgers." Jimmy gestured, and Simone Cantrell stepped forward with a leather-bound book. Detailed ledgers showing payments received from nobles in exchange for access to servants. Your signature appears on every page. Gerald's confidence flickered, just slightly. "Those could be forgeries. They could be." Jimmy agreed. "Except we also have testimony from the servants themselves. 5 young women willing to stand before this court and tell everyone exactly what you did. The word of servants against mine?" Gerald laughed. "Your Majesty, with all respect, that's hardly—" "Bring them in." The side door opened. Poppy stepped into the throne room first, followed by Briella, Clara, Kimora, and Pearl. The crowd erupted. Servants gasping in recognition, nobles shouting in outrage, guards struggling to maintain order. But Poppy barely heard it. She was focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on walking across that endless marble floor without collapsing. Jimmy's eyes found hers, held them. And in that moment, she felt his strength flowing into her. She could do this. They all could. The 5 young women stopped in front of the throne. Jimmy descended from the dais to stand with them, a symbolic gesture that sent another wave of shock through the crowd. A king did not stand with servants. A king stood above them, but Jimmy was standing beside them, equal, united. "Tell them," he said quietly, his voice for them alone. "Tell them everything." Pearl went first. She spoke in a clear, steady voice about the first time Gerald had noticed her, about being dragged to his quarters, about the pain and the fear and the years of silence that followed. Clara went next, her voice softer but no less powerful. She described the bruises, the threats, the way Gerald had made sure they all knew that speaking out meant disappearing. Kimura's testimony was clinical, detailing dates and times with precision that made the abuse feel even more horrific in its regularity. Briella spoke about the other girls, the ones who had left or vanished, the ghosts of the castle that no one talked about. And finally, Poppy stepped forward. She looked directly at Gerald as she spoke. At the man who had dragged her through corridors, who had hurt her so badly she couldn't walk. "You told me I was nothing," she said, her voice ringing through the silent hall. "You said no one would believe me, no one would care, that I was just a servant, and servants don't matter." Gerald's face had gone from confident to pale. "But you were wrong." Poppy's voice strengthened. "Because I matter. We all matter. And today, everyone is going to know what you are." She turned to face the crowd. "This didn't just happen to us. It happened to dozens of girls before us. And it would have kept happening if we hadn't spoken up, if King Jimmy hadn't listened." She looked up at Jimmy and found him watching her with an expression of pride and something deeper. Something that made her breath catch. "I'm not asking for Gerald's death," Poppy continued. "I'm asking for something better. I'm asking for laws that protect servants, for oversight of those in power, for a system where abuse can't hide in shadows anymore." Jimmy's hand moved to rest on her shoulder, warm and steady. "You'll have it," he said quietly. Then louder, addressing the crowd. "Every word of their testimony will be recorded, every request will be considered, and those who enabled this abuse will be held accountable." He gestured to the chained nobles. "Wesley O'Connell, Gregory Hampton, Bruce Chandler. You paid Gerald Cantrell for access to servants. You funded his abuse. You are as guilty as he is." Wesley dropped to his knees. "Your Majesty, please. I didn't know. I thought they were willing. The ledgers say otherwise." Jimmy's voice was cold. "You knew exactly what you were paying for. And you did it anyway." He turned to face the entire court. "I am enacting new laws, effective immediately. Any noble found abusing servants will be stripped of titles and lands. Any steward found enabling such abuse will be exiled. And any servant who comes forward with accusations will be given full protection and investigation." The throne room exploded into chaos. Nobles shouting protests, servants weeping, guards trying to maintain order. Jimmy raised his hand, and gradually, silence fell. "The sentence for Gerald Cantrell is exile. He will be stripped of all possessions, all status, and escorted beyond our borders within the day. He is never to return on pain of death." Gerald's arrogance finally cracked. "You can't do this. I have served." "You have abused," Jimmy interrupted, "and now you'll live with the consequences. Take him away." Guards seized Gerald, dragging him from the hall as he screamed protests. "The sentence for Wesley O'Connell, Gregory Hampton, and Bruce Chandler is the same. Exile. Effective immediately." More guards moved forward. The three nobles were hauled to their feet and escorted out, their chains rattling. Jimmy waited until the doors closed behind them. Then he addressed the court again. "To the victims of this abuse, I offer restitution, land grants, legal protection, status within this kingdom that recognizes your courage and your worth." He looked at each of the 5 young women in turn. "Poppy Hendricks, Briella Doolin, Clara Chandler, Kimura Haskins, Pearl Mackenzie, you are no longer servants. You are landowners, free women, and anyone who tries to hurt you will answer to me personally." The throne room erupted again, but this time the sound was different. Not shock or outrage, but something that might have been hope. Poppy felt tears streaming down her face, felt Briella's hand slip into hers, felt the weight of years of fear finally lifting. Jimmy leaned down to whisper in her ear, "You did it. You changed everything." She looked up at him. This powerful king who had knelt for her, who had listened to her, who had believed her when no one else would. "We did it," she whispered back, "together." His smile was soft and private and full of promises. Together. The aftermath of the trial stretched for weeks. Nobles who had supported Gerald fled the kingdom. Others swore new oaths of loyalty to Jimmy. The power structure of the entire realm shifted like sand beneath waves. But through it all, Poppy and the other girls stayed in the castle, protected and honored. Lydia continued treating Poppy's physical injuries until they were nothing but faint scars. The emotional wounds took longer, but with time and safety and the support of the other girls, those began to heal too. Jimmy visited her every night. Sometimes he read to her. Sometimes they just talked, sharing stories of their lives, learning each other in quiet moments stolen from the chaos of rebuilding a kingdom. And sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, his hand holding hers, the air between them charged with unspoken desire. 1 month after the trial, Lydia declared Poppy fully healed, physically at least, the healer said with a knowing smile. Emotionally? That's between you and certain other people. After Lydia left, Poppy stood at the window of the king's chambers, still her temporary home, and looked out over the kingdom. Her kingdom now. She owned land here, had rights here, was protected here. The door opened behind her. She knew without turning who it was. Lydia says you're healed, Jimmy said quietly. She did. That's good. He moved to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could feel his warmth. I've had your land prepared. It's yours whenever you want to claim it. Poppy's heart sank. You want me to leave? What? No. Jimmy turned to face her, his expression shocked. No, Poppy. I'm saying you're free to go if you choose. But He swallowed hard. I'm hoping you'll choose to stay. Why? He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. Because I meant what I said before. I want everything with you. But only if you want it too. Only if you choose me, freely, without obligation or fear. Poppy looked at their joined hands, at this man who had saved her, protected her, and given her choices when she'd never had any before. I choose you, she whispered. Jimmy's breath caught. Poppy, I choose you, she said again, louder. Not because you're king, not because you saved me, but because you're kind and fierce and you listen and you care. Because when I'm with you, I feel safe and seen and wanted. Because I've been falling for you since the moment you knelt in that war chamber. Jimmy cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. I'm going to kiss you now, he murmured. If you don't want. Poppy rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first. Tentative. Testing. Then Jimmy made a low sound in his throat, and the kiss deepened. His arms came around her, pulling her close but not crushing, holding her like she was precious. Poppy's hands slid up his chest to his shoulders, feeling the strength there, the control he was maintaining even now. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jimmy rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he whispered. I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other. But I love you, Poppy Hendricks. I love you too, she breathed. Jimmy. He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, tasting her like she was something rare and beautiful. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with desire, but his voice was steady. We can take this as slow as you need. I want you, but I won't rush you. Poppy smiled, feeling brave and safe and desired all at once. What if I don't want slow? Heat flared in Jimmy's eyes. Then we'll take it at whatever pace you set. But Poppy, he brushed a strand of hair from her face. I want to do this right. I want to court you properly. I want the whole kingdom to know you're mine and I'm yours. Court me? Poppy laughed softly. You're the king. You don't court servants. You're not a servant anymore. You're a landowner, a free woman. And yes, I'm the king. But with you, I'm just Jimmy, a man who wants to spend the rest of his life making you happy. Poppy's heart swelled. Then court me, properly. Show the whole kingdom. Jimmy's smile was brilliant. It would be my honor. He kissed her again, and this time, Poppy felt all the promises in it. Protection, devotion, passion, love. Everything she'd never thought she could have. Everything she'd survived to find. The announcement came during the weekly court session. King Jimmy Mackenzie, standing before the assembled nobles and servants, declared his intention to court Poppy Hendricks. The reaction was predictable chaos. Nobles sputtered about tradition and bloodlines. Servants whispered in excitement. Guards tried to maintain order while obviously wanting to gossip themselves. Through it all, Jimmy stood calm and unwavering, his hand extended toward Poppy where she stood at the side of the throne room. She took it. The simple act of walking through that crowd, hand in hand with the king, felt both terrifying and triumphant. Whispers followed them like waves. A servant girl? The Omega from the trial? He can't be serious. But Jimmy's grip on her hand never wavered. He led her to the dais and, in a move that sent fresh gasps through the crowd, pulled a second chair beside his throne. Poppy Hendricks will be joining me for all public audiences from now on, he announced. You will treat her with the same respect you show me. Anyone who doesn't will find themselves very unwelcome in this castle. Poppy sat down, her heart racing, very aware of every eye on her. The court session continued, but she barely heard it. She was too focused on the feel of Jimmy's hand still holding hers, visible to everyone, making a statement more powerful than any words. After court ended, Briella found her in the corridor. That was incredible, her friend gushed. Did you see their faces? I saw nothing but the floor, Poppy admitted. I was terrified. You didn't look terrified. You looked. Briella paused, searching for the word. Powerful. Like you belonged there. I don't belong there. I'm a landowner, Briella interrupted. A free woman. Someone the king chose to court publicly. Poppy, you belong wherever you decide to be. Clara and Kimura appeared, equally excited. The seamstresses want to make you dresses, Clara said. Court dresses. They sent a message asking what colors you prefer. I don't need court dresses. I have... You need them, Kimura said firmly. If you're going to stand beside the king, you need to look the part. Not for him, he'd love you in rags, but for everyone else. Show them you're serious. Poppy looked at her friends, these women who had survived alongside her, who had testified alongside her, who were now navigating this strange new world together. All right, she said finally. Court dresses, but nothing too elaborate. Too late, Pearl called, appearing from around a corner with armfuls of fabric. I already commissioned 6. They spent the afternoon in Poppy's chambers, still technically the king's chambers, though she'd made them her own with small touches, sorting through fabrics and designs. Jimmy found them there at sunset, laughing over a particularly ridiculous sleeve design. Am I interrupting? He asked from the doorway. 5 heads turned. Briella and the others quickly excused themselves, leaving Poppy alone with Jimmy. He closed the door and leaned against it, just watching her. What? Poppy asked, suddenly self-conscious. You're happy, he said softly. It's the first time I've seen you truly happy. It suits you. Poppy looked down at the fabrics scattered across the bed. They're helping me prepare for court. Apparently I need to look the part. You look perfect exactly as you are. Jimmy crossed the room and picked up a length of deep blue silk. But this would bring out your eyes. If you want it. I want you to stop spending money on me, Poppy said, though there was no heat in it. Then you'll be disappointed. I plan to spend money on you for the rest of our lives. He set the fabric aside and took her hands. How are you really? With all of this? The announcement, the attention, the changes? Terrified, Poppy admitted. But also, excited? Is that strange? Not at all. Jimmy pulled her closer, his arms sliding around her waist. You're allowed to be both. Poppy rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Some of the nobles hate this. Hate me. They'll adjust. And if they don't, then they can leave. Jimmy's voice was firm. I won't choose politics over you, Poppy. Not ever. She looked up at him. What if there's a rebellion? What if your kingdom falls apart because of me? Then we'll build a better one. He cupped her face gently. You're worth more than a crown, more than a kingdom. You're worth everything. Poppy rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet. When they pulled apart, Jimmy smiled. I have something to show you. Will you come with me? Where? Trust me? Poppy took his hand. Always. Jimmy led her through corridors she'd never seen, upstairs she didn't know existed, until they reached a heavy wooden door at the top of the highest tower. Close your eyes, he instructed. Poppy obeyed, letting him guide her forward. All right. Open them, she gasped. They were in a glass-walled observatory. The sun was setting over the kingdom, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, the castle sprawled, and beyond that, fields and forests stretched to the horizon. "This is beautiful," Poppy breathed. "This is yours," Jimmy said. "I had it prepared for you. A private space where you can come whenever you need to escape the court, or just to think, or to watch the sunset." Poppy turned to stare at him. "You prepared this for me?" "I started the day after the trial." Jimmy looked almost shy. "I wanted you to have somewhere that was just yours, somewhere you could breathe." Tears pricked at Poppy's eyes. "You're too good to me. Impossible." Jimmy pulled her close. "I could never be good enough for you." They stood together, watching the sun sink below the horizon, wrapped in each other's arms, and Poppy felt something shift inside her. She'd been surviving for so long, fighting, hiding, enduring, but now she was living. "I want to see my land," she said suddenly. Jimmy pulled back to look at her. "Your estate?" "Yes, tomorrow. I want to see it, really see it." A slow smile spread across Jimmy's face. "Then we'll go tomorrow. Just us. And a dozen guards?" Poppy guessed. "Just us," Jimmy repeated firmly. "I can protect you myself." The promise in his voice sent heat through her. Poppy pressed closer, feeling bold. "Can you now?" "Always." His eyes darkened. "From anything. From anyone." "What if I don't want protection?" Poppy's voice came out breathier than intended. "What if I want something else?" Jimmy's control visibly frayed. His hands tightened on her waist. "Poppy, you said we'd go at my pace," she reminded him. "This is my pace. Are you sure?" Instead of answering, Poppy kissed him. This kiss was different from the others. Hungry, demanding, full of weeks of restrained desire finally unleashed. Jimmy groaned against her mouth, his hands sliding up her back, pulling her impossibly closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes blazed with barely controlled want. "Not here," he said roughly. "Not in a tower. When this happens, it's going to be somewhere comfortable, somewhere I can take my time with you." Heat pooled low in Poppy's belly. "How much time?" "Hours," Jimmy growled. "All night, until you're so satisfied you can't move, until you know exactly how much I want you." Poppy shivered. "That sounds thorough. It's a promise." He kissed her again, softer this time. "But not tonight. Tonight, I'm going to show you your observatory, explain all the constellations visible from here, and then escort you back to your chambers, like a gentleman. And tomorrow?" Jimmy's smile was wicked. "Tomorrow we visit your estate. Just us, no interruptions. And we'll see where the day takes us." The promise hung between them, charged with possibility. Poppy nodded, knowing her cheeks were flushed, knowing exactly what she was agreeing to. Tomorrow, they left at dawn. No guards, no attendants, just Jimmy on a massive black stallion and Poppy on a smaller mare with a gentle disposition. The ride took 2 hours through countryside, still waking up. Farmers waved as they passed. Children stopped their games to stare at the king riding by with a young woman who clearly wasn't from the castle. "They don't know it's you," Poppy said as they slowed to a walk. "They will eventually." Jimmy's smile was relaxed, younger somehow than his court smile. "But for now, we're just two people riding through a beautiful morning." Poppy's estate appeared over a rise in the land. It wasn't large, nothing like the noble manors she'd seen from a distance, but it was hers. A stone house with a thatched roof, an orchard heavy with late summer apples, fields already prepared for planting, a small barn and garden plot, everything a person would need to build a life. Poppy dismounted before they reached the door, wanting to approach on foot, to feel the ground beneath her boots. Her ground. Jimmy followed, leading both horses. "There's a caretaker," he explained. "Hayden Mills. He's been maintaining the property until you claimed it." "Good man." Loyal. As if summoned, a man emerged from the barn. He was older, weathered, with kind eyes. "Your Majesty," Hayden bowed to Jimmy, then turned to Poppy. "And you must be Miss Hendricks. Welcome home." Home. The word settled into Poppy's chest like a warm stone. "Thank you," she managed. "It's beautiful. I'll see to the horses," Hayden said tactfully. Give you time to explore. He led the horses away, leaving Poppy and Jimmy alone. Shall we? Jimmy offered his arm. They walked through the house first. Simple but well built. A main room with a fireplace. A kitchen stocked with basics. 2 bedrooms upstairs. Windows overlooking the orchard. It was more than Poppy had ever imagined owning. The orchard needs work, she said, looking out at the apple trees. And the garden plot should be planted before winter. And you'll have time for all of it. Jimmy came to stand behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. This is yours, Poppy, to do with as you please. Live here full-time, visit when you want, hire someone to manage it. Whatever makes you happy. Poppy leaned back against him. What would make you happy? You being happy makes me happy. His arms slid around her waist. But personally, I like the idea of you staying at the castle, keeping your chambers, coming here when you need peace, living with you. Poppy turned in his arms to face him. Eventually. Jimmy's voice was careful. When you're ready, if you want that. I want that, Poppy said softly. I want you, all of you, not just the king who saved me, the man who reads poetry and builds observatories and rides out at dawn without guards, just to show me my land. Jimmy's eyes darkened. Poppy, make love to me, she whispered. Here, in my house, in my bed. Show me what it's like when someone actually wants me. For a moment, Jimmy just stared at her. Then, with deliberate slowness, he backed her toward the stairs. Are you absolutely certain? His voice was rough with restrained desire. Because once I start, I won't want to stop. I'll want to taste every inch of you. Learn what makes you sigh. Discover exactly how to make you fall apart in my arms. Heat flooded through Poppy. I'm certain. Jimmy lifted her, and Poppy wrapped her legs around his waist as he carried her up the stairs. The bedroom was simple, just a bed and a window, but it didn't matter. He laid her down gently, reverently, like she was something precious. We go at your pace, he reminded her, kneeling beside the bed. You say stop, we stop. You say slower, we slow down. This is for you, Poppy. All for you. She reached up to cup his face. I trust you. Those 3 words seemed to undo him. Jimmy leaned down and kissed her, deep and thorough and full of restrained hunger finally unleashed. His hands moved to the laces of her dress, questioning. Poppy nodded, and he began undoing them with careful precision. When her dress fell away, leaving her in just her shift, Jimmy pulled back to look at her. Beautiful, he breathed. You're so beautiful. Poppy's cheeks flushed. Your turn. He smiled and stood, removing his shirt with efficient movements. Poppy's breath caught at the sight of him, all lean muscle and old scars, powerful and controlled. When he rejoined her on the bed, skin against skin, Poppy gasped at the sensation. He was warm and solid and everything she'd imagined. Tell me what you like, Jimmy murmured against her neck. Guide me. So she did. She told him when his kisses made her shiver. When his touch felt perfect. When she wanted more, harder, deeper. And Jimmy listened to every word, every sound, every breath. He took his time exploring her, learning her, worshipping her with hands and mouth, until Poppy was writhing beneath him, desperate and wanting. Please, she gasped. Jimmy, please. I've got you. His voice was steady even as his hands shook slightly with restraint. I've got you, love. When they finally came together, it was slow and careful and perfect. Jimmy watched her face the entire time, checking for any sign of pain, any hint that she wanted to stop. But all Poppy felt was pleasure, connection, love. Look at me, Jimmy commanded softly as they moved together. I want to see you. Poppy met his eyes, and the intensity there took her breath away. This wasn't just physical. It was emotional, spiritual. The joining of 2 people who had found each other against all odds. When release finally crashed through her, Poppy cried out Jimmy's name. He followed moments later, his own control finally breaking as he buried his face in her neck. They stayed tangled together afterward, breathing hard, hearts racing. That was... Poppy couldn't find words. Perfect, Jimmy finished. You were perfect. He rolled to his side, pulling her with him so they faced each other on the narrow bed. Poppy traced the scars on his chest. How did you get this one? Training accident when I was 16. Bruce, before he turned traitor, hit me harder than he meant to. And this one? Battle on the western border. 3 years ago. They lay there trading stories and soft touches until the sun climbed higher. Finally, Jimmy sighed. We should get back before someone sends a search party. Or we could stay here forever, Poppy suggested, only half joking. Jimmy kissed her forehead. Tempting. But you have court dresses to try on, and I have a kingdom to run. Fine, Poppy stretched, then winced slightly. Jimmy was immediately alert. Are you all right? Did I hurt you? No. She smiled at his concern. Just pleasantly sore. In a good way. His answering smile was pleased and male and just a touch smug. Good. They dressed slowly, stealing kisses between layers of clothing. When they finally descended the stairs, they found Hayden waiting with the horses ready. Good visit? He asked, his expression carefully neutral. Excellent, Jimmy said smoothly. Miss Hendricks is very pleased with the property. Happy to hear it, Your Majesty. They rode back to the castle in comfortable silence, hands occasionally brushing as their horses walked side by side. Everything had changed, and yet somehow, Poppy felt like things were finally, perfectly right. The opposition to Jimmy's courtship of Poppy came from an unexpected source. Lord Reginald Brock, an elderly noble who had served Jimmy's father and grandfather, called for a formal council meeting 2 weeks after the courtship announcement. This is unprecedented, Reginald declared, standing in the council chamber with a dozen other nobles behind him. An Alpha King courting an Omega servant? It undermines centuries of tradition. Jimmy sat at the head of the council table, his expression neutral. Poppy stood beside his chair, her new place in all official proceedings. Poppy is not a servant, Jimmy said quietly. She's a landowner, a free woman, and frankly, her status is irrelevant. I choose to court her. That's my right as king. But the bloodlines, another noble protested. If you marry her, any heirs would be mine, Jimmy interrupted, his voice hardening. And that's all that matters. Reginald stepped forward. Your Majesty, please understand. We're not trying to disrespect Miss Hendricks. We're trying to protect the stability of the realm. The people expect their king to marry strategically, to form alliances, to do what's best for the kingdom. Jimmy finished. I agree. And what's best for this kingdom is a ruler who actually gives a damn about the people in it. Not just the nobles. Not just the wealthy. All of them. He stood, and the room seemed to shrink around his presence. Poppy represents everything this kingdom should be. She's strong, brave, compassionate. She survived years of abuse and still chose mercy over vengeance. She stood in front of this entire court and demanded justice not just for herself, but for everyone who couldn't speak. That's the kind of person I want beside me, the kind of person this kingdom needs to see beside me. Silence fell. Reginald looked at Poppy, really looked at her, for the first time. You truly love him? With everything I am, Poppy said quietly. And you, Your Majesty? This isn't just attraction? Jimmy's hand found Poppy's. This is love. Real, deep, unshakable love. The kind I'd walk away from the throne for if I had to. More gasps. But I won't have to, Jimmy continued. Because I believe in this council. I believe you all are intelligent enough to see that tradition is only valuable when it serves the people. When it doesn't, it needs to change. Reginald studied them both for a long moment. Then, slowly, he bowed. Then I wish you both happiness, Your Majesty. Truly. Other nobles followed suit, some reluctantly, some with genuine warmth, but not all. 3 nobles walked out of the chamber, their silence a clear statement. After the meeting ended, Jimmy pulled Poppy aside. That went better than I expected, he admitted. 3 nobles left, and a dozen stayed. Jimmy cupped her face. We're winning, Poppy. Slowly, but we're winning. What if the ones who left caused trouble? Then we'll handle it. He kissed her softly. Together, like we handle everything. The trouble came faster than expected. 2 days later, reports arrived of unrest in the Western Territories. Nobles refusing to pay taxes, merchants withholding goods, whispers of rebellion. Jimmy called an emergency council meeting. "They're using your courtship as an excuse," Simone Cantrell reported, "claiming you're unfit to rule because you're distracted by an Omega." Jimmy's jaw clenched. "How many are involved?" "At least 6 noble houses. Maybe more. Enough to cause real problems," Josiah Hampton added. Jeremy Doolin leaned forward. "We can end this quickly, Your Majesty. Show of force. Remind them who holds power." "No," Jimmy's voice was firm. "Violence will only prove their point that I'm acting irrationally." "Then what do you suggest?" Reginald asked. Jimmy looked at Poppy, who had been silent throughout the meeting. "What do you think?" Every head turned to her. Poppy's heart raced, but she forced herself to think clearly. "They're not really angry about us. They're angry about the changes. The new laws protecting servants, the redistribution of power. We're just a convenient target." "Exactly," Jimmy agreed. "So we need to show them the changes are working," Poppy continued. "Show them the kingdom is stronger, not weaker. Show them that protecting people instead of exploiting them actually makes economic sense." "How?" Simone asked. An idea formed in Poppy's mind. The other girls, Briella, Clara, Kimora, Pearl, they all have estates now. Land that wasn't being used productively before. What if we make those estates into models? Show that giving Omega's opportunities creates wealth, not destroys it. Jimmy's eyes lit up. "A tour. We visit each estate, show the improvements, demonstrate the economic benefits." "And I go with you," Poppy added. "Face the people directly. Show them I'm not some helpless Omega distracting their king. I'm a person contributing to the kingdom's success." Jeremy grinned. "That's brilliant." "It's risky," Reginald warned. "If the tour goes badly." "It won't," Jimmy said with absolute confidence. "Because Poppy's right. This isn't really about us. It's about fear of change. And the best way to fight fear is with proof." The council agreed to the plan. Over the next week, preparations were made. Routes planned, security arranged, messages sent ahead. The night before they were set to leave, Jimmy found Poppy in the observatory. "Second thoughts?" he asked, joining her at the window. "Terrified thoughts," Poppy admitted. "What if I mess this up? What if I say the wrong thing and make everything worse?" Jimmy pulled her into his arms. "You won't. You're going to be amazing. Because you're not pretending to be someone you're not. You're just being you. And you are more than enough." Poppy buried her face in his chest. "I love you. I love you too." He tilted her chin up. "And whatever happens out there, we face it together." "Agreed?" "Agreed." They stood together watching the stars, gathering strength for the journey ahead. The tour began at Briella's estate. She had transformed her land into a weaving operation, employing other Omegas who needed work. The fabrics they produced were already being sold in markets, bringing in steady income. Poppy watched Jimmy walk through the operation, asking questions, praising the quality of the work. Watched nobles who had come to observe reluctantly nodding in approval. "This is actually profitable," one muttered. "More than profitable," Briella said proudly. "We're expanding next month." At Clara's estate, they found a thriving herb garden. She had trained with Lydia and was now providing medicines to surrounding villages at affordable prices. "The sick don't care who treats them," Clara explained to the gathered crowd. "They just want to get better, and now they can, without going into debt." Kimora had established a school, a small one, just a dozen children from local families, but she taught them reading and numbers and history. Education shouldn't be just for the wealthy, she told a skeptical noble. These children will grow up to be merchants, craftsmen, leaders. The kingdom benefits when everyone can read. Pearl's estate was the most surprising. She had turned it into a sanctuary for abused Omegas, providing them shelter and protection while they healed. "We've helped 17 women so far," she said quietly. "Women who would have died if they'd stayed where they were. Now they're alive. Some are even thriving." With each stop, Poppy saw the opposition softening, saw nobles who had been skeptical starting to understand. This wasn't about tradition versus progress. It was about people versus profits. And people were winning. The final stop was Poppy's estate. Hayden had worked tirelessly to prepare it. The orchard was pruned and healthy. The garden plot showed the first green shoots of winter vegetables. The house gleamed with fresh paint and care. "This represents possibility," Poppy said, addressing the crowd that had gathered nobles, merchants, farmers, servants. 6 months ago, I was invisible, disposable. A servant girl with no future and no hope. Now I own land. I have choices. I have a voice. And I'm not unique. Every Omega in this kingdom deserves the same opportunities. She looked at Jimmy, standing beside her, solid and supportive. King Jimmy gave me those opportunities, not because he had to, not because tradition demanded it, but because he saw me as a person worth protecting, worth loving. And that's the kind of kingdom he's building. One where everyone is seen, where everyone matters. The crowd was silent. Then, from the back, a farmer started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Others joined. Merchants, servants, even a few nobles. The applause built until it echoed across the fields. Jimmy stepped forward and took Poppy's hand, raising it high. A statement, a declaration. This is my choice, and I don't regret it. The journey back to the castle took 2 days. They spent the first night at an inn, claiming a private room away from the guards and attendants. Jimmy carried Poppy over the threshold, a playful echo of wedding traditions, and she laughed against his chest. "We're not married yet," she pointed out. "Yet," Jimmy agreed, setting her down gently. "But soon, if you'll have me." Poppy's breath caught. "Is that a proposal?" "Not officially. Not yet." Jimmy brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I want to do it properly. Grand gesture, beautiful ring, the whole kingdom watching. But yes, Poppy, I want to marry you. I want to spend the rest of my life waking up beside you, fighting for this kingdom with you, building something better together." "Yes," Poppy whispered. "Whenever you ask properly, the answer is yes." Jimmy kissed her, deep and thorough and full of promise. They made love slowly that night, learning each other again with hands and mouths and whispered words, taking their time because they could, because they had all night, because they had the rest of their lives. Afterward, wrapped in blankets and each other, Poppy traced patterns on Jimmy's chest. "Tell me something," she said quietly. "Something you've never told anyone." Jimmy was silent for a moment. "I was terrified when you collapsed in the war chamber." "Of what?" "Of failing you. Of being too late. Of being just another person who saw you hurting and did nothing." His arms tightened around her. "Every king before me would have called guards. Would have had you removed. Would have ignored what was happening because tradition said that's what you do. But I couldn't. Not with you. Something in me just broke. Or maybe it was already broken, and you made me realize it." "I don't think you were broken," Poppy said softly. "I think you were just waiting to be yourself. Maybe." Jimmy kissed the top of her head. "What about you? Tell me something." "I dream about the war chamber sometimes." Poppy's voice was barely audible. "I dream I'm back on that floor, hurt and afraid. But this time, when I look up, you're not there. No one's there. And I wake up terrified that this is all temporary, that I'll lose you." "You won't." Jimmy's voice was fierce. "I promise you, Poppy, you will never lose me. I'm yours, completely, forever." She believed him. They returned to the castle to find it transformed. Servants moved with new confidence. Omegas smiled openly. The atmosphere had shifted from oppression to hope. "You did this," Simone told Jimmy in a private meeting. "The tour worked. Support for the new laws is up. The rebel nobles are backing down. Even Reginald is advocating for expanding Omega rights." Jimmy shook his head. "We did this. All of us. Poppy, Briella, Clara, Kimura, Pearl. Every servant who found the courage to speak up. Every noble who chose progress over tradition. Still," Josiah said with a grin, "history's going to remember you as the king who changed everything." "Good." Jimmy's smile was satisfied. Let them remember that some traditions deserve to die. That evening, Jimmy asked Poppy to wear her finest dress, one of the court dresses Pearl had commissioned, deep blue silk that brought out her eyes. "Where are we going?" she asked as he led her through the castle. "You'll see." They climbed to the observatory, but when Jimmy opened the door, Poppy gasped. The entire space was filled with candles, hundreds of them, casting warm golden light across the glass walls. And in the center, standing in a circle, were Briella, Clara, Kimora, and Pearl. "What's happening?" Poppy whispered. Jimmy took her hands and knelt. Right there, in front of her friends, with the kingdom spread out below them. "Poppy Hendricks," he said, his voice steady and sure. "6 months ago, you collapsed in my war chamber and changed my life forever. You showed me what courage looks like, what strength means, what love can be when it's real and honest and true. You challenge me, you inspire me, you make me want to be better than I am." He pulled a ring from his pocket. Simple silver set, with a single deep blue stone. "Will you marry me? Will you stand beside me not as a subject, but as an equal? Will you help me build a kingdom worth living in? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you?" Tears streamed down Poppy's face. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Jimmy slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms and kissing her while their friends cheered. When they finally broke apart, Poppy was laughing and crying at once. "It's perfect," she breathed. "You're perfect." "We're perfect," Jimmy corrected. "Together." They celebrated late into the night. Briella produced wine she'd been saving. Clara sang. Kimora told stories that had them all laughing until their sides hurt. And through it all, Jimmy kept Poppy close, his hand in hers, his eyes full of love and promise and absolute certainty. This was right. This was real. This was forever. The wedding took place 3 months later, in the castle's great hall. Every noble in the kingdom attended. Every servant was given the day off to celebrate. The entire city turned out to witness an alpha king marry an omega girl. Poppy wore white silk stitched with silver thread. Her hair was woven with flowers from her own orchard. She carried a bouquet of herbs from Clara's garden. Briella, Clara, Kimora, and Pearl stood with her as witnesses. Jimmy wore ceremonial armor, but his expression was soft as Poppy walked toward him. The ceremony was traditional in some ways, revolutionary in others. Instead of Poppy promising obedience, she promised partnership. Instead of Jimmy claiming dominion, he vowed equality. They wrote their own promises, spoken in front of the entire kingdom. "I promise to see you," Poppy said, her voice clear and strong. "To listen to you, to stand with you in every storm, to choose you every single day." "I promise to honor you," Jimmy responded. "To protect you without controlling you, to love you without limiting you, to be yours, completely, for as long as we both live." They exchanged rings, kissed, turned to face their people as king and queen. The hall erupted in cheers. The years that followed were not easy. There were still nobles who resented the changes, still moments of crisis and conflict and hard decisions. But through it all, Poppy and Jimmy stood together. She learned to rule beside him, to make decisions that affected thousands, to balance compassion with authority. He learned to listen more than he spoke, to trust the people around him, to let others share the burden of leadership. Together, they expanded Omega rights until the word servant became synonymous with employee, a job, not a sentence. They established schools in every territory, made healthcare accessible, rewrote laws that had been unjust for centuries, and they loved each other, fiercely, completely, without reservation. 5 years after their wedding, Poppy stood in the observatory, their special place, with Jimmy's arms around her and their daughter sleeping against her chest. "Tell me something," Jimmy murmured, echoing their first real conversation. Poppy smiled. "I'm happy, truly deeply happy, and I never thought I'd be able to say that. Tell me something else. I love you, more every day, even when you're being stubborn about council meetings." Jimmy laughed quietly. "I love you too, even when you reorganize my entire schedule without asking." They stood together watching the sun set over their kingdom, their daughter between them, and Poppy thought about that terrified girl who had collapsed in the war chamber. She'd been broken, hurt, barely surviving, but she'd survived, and in surviving, she'd found something she never expected. She'd found love, real love, the kind that changed kingdoms and rewrote laws and proved that tradition was only as strong as the people willing to uphold it. She'd found a partner who saw her, who listened to her, who knelt for her when he should have stood above her. She'd found herself. "Thank you," she whispered against Jimmy's chest. "For what?" "For kneeling, for listening, for loving me when I couldn't love myself." Jimmy kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for crawling into that war chamber, for being brave enough to ask for help, for giving me the chance to be better than every king who came before me." Their daughter stirred, and they both looked down at her. She had Poppy's eyes and Jimmy's dark hair, and she was perfect. "She's going to change the world," Poppy said softly. "Just like her mother," Jimmy agreed. And somewhere in the castle below, servants worked without fear. Omegas lived without chains. Children learned in schools that didn't exist 5 years ago. The kingdom wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was better, and it would keep getting better. Because a king had learned to kneel, and a servant girl had learned to stand. And together, they had built something worth fighting for. Something worth living for. Something worth loving. Forever. If this story moved you, if Poppy's pain became your pain, and her triumph became your hope, if you believe that love can change kingdoms, and courage can rewrite traditions, then you're exactly where you belong. Welcome to a world where broken souls find protection, where the most powerful rulers kneel not in weakness, but in love, and where every ending is just another beginning. Because some stories don't just entertain, they transform, and this was transformation.